We're back today with some questions from our audience. These questions are going to focus on the group that are, post-retirement, so 60s, 70s, 80s. We've gotten several questions that kind of group into a few different categories. We'll cover as many as we can today, and we're going to talk through when things change beyond, just the fact that you're retired. So maybe you're currently married and you end up single either because your spouse passes away or because of a divorce or vice versa. So we'll talk through all of the different ways that your questions might change based on marital status.
Welcome to Operation Retirement Readiness, where Amy and Mike, two certified financial planners, talk about how military members can prepare for transition and how veterans can prepare for ultimate retirement. This podcast represents the views of the hosts and any guest. It is for informational purposes only and should not be considered tax, financial, or legal advice. All information is regarded to be from reliable sources. The hosts are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. This podcast is not intended to replace professional advice.
All right, welcome everybody. As Amy said, we're going to be talking through some questions today that we've got from listeners. So the first kind of general category we're going to talk about is how do you create a drawdown strategy once you're in retirement? You've got these assets, you need to turn those into income, and how do you go about thinking about that and planning for it? Again, across a large age range and a potential, hopefully long retirement. So, Amy, any initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, by the time you get to your 70s, at a minimum, almost everyone is going to draw Social Security. There's a few people that may not have access to Social Security. But for the most part, that's going to form the foundation of your spending strategy. Military retirees, of course, will have their pension stacked on top of that. And then after that, then the considerations really come down to, what other resources do you have available to fund your needs. Now, the nice thing for military retirees is very typically your Social Security and your pension, maybe some VA disability. Those things are already going to cover your needs. Your portfolio, those other assets that are available to you, are going to be able to cover your wants and sort of the lifestyle that you'd like to have. And I think we should kind of banter back and forth on this, Mike. But I think where do you start on that? Well, it depends on the mix of the assets. Where are the assets located? So is it a taxable brokerage account, a bank account? Is it a Roth IRA? Is it a regular IRA? Is it still in your TSP? So lots of different variations there. You want to jump in and talk about all that kind of stuff, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, opportunities to do tax planning around some of this, which, as you ran through those list of accounts, they all have different tax treatments. So understanding that you will get taxed on your Social Security and your pension coming in. And so, kind of looking out long term on the tax implications of your drawdown strategy are going to be important. But so yeah, the easiest, you have cash, you just spend that. There's really no tax consequences of that. You move over to the Roth IRA, again, no tax consequences for taking money out of that, assuming you're over 59 and a half, which a full retirement, we're talking about that. The one that you will get taxed on is any kind of traditional IRA or 401k account. So when you're pulling income out of those accounts, you will get taxed. And so, kind of spreading that out is important. The other thing, once you, for most of our listeners, if you're born after, for this, some folks may have earlier RMD dates of like age 73, or they're already, having to take their accounts out. But for people born after 1960, 60 or after, they will, have to start taking RMDs from traditional accounts in at age 75. So making sure you understand that and understand what kind of amounts that will be for you if you've got a large $1 million traditional IRA or 401k, that's going to generate a bunch of income. So it could make sense to spread that out, start taking them early or doing conversions early. But putting that all in the mix and understanding it is important when you're considering your drawdown strategy.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, as I work with clients on plans, the tax planning piece is incredibly valuable. And understanding that is just, not for every client, but for many clients, it can be the number one way that you change the outcome of your plan. Um, Again, not always, but definitely sometimes. Um, as you think about, we've talked about, how do you plan for spending in retirement, things like that. So if we're talking about military retirees, Social Security and pensions are typically covering sort of that baseline income. Probably military retirees are not, going to live on cat food and in a box, that sort of thing. But if you think about, the drawdown strategy, which honestly is much more complex than, the accumulation strategy. Accumulation strategy, if you just do it and you're pretty consistent in how you do it, and you're investing in things that are not too speculative and not just cash, you're probably going to be okay. But decumulation is a different animal altogether. So, Mike, when you think about, the approach to covering different kinds of expenses and how to take money out and sort of coming up with a strategy. So whether it's a fixed percent per year or a bucket strategy or maybe a guardrail strategy, how do you think about that?
So I really like to think about it as, you've already hit on covering the needs and seeing where, your guaranteed income, that money that's going to be coming in every month, where that is and how much that covers of what you plan to spend. Um, After that, I like to have some set aside money for, the long term care, potential inheritance, or charitable gifting if somebody has that. And then, probably a little bit of buffer in addition to that. But that's kind of earmarked for specific things. We don't know if they'll happen or not, on the long term care side, or just the buffer if something, goes, off your plan. But kind of having that set aside. And then the rest of that money is money that, you can spend to live, your best retired life. And, I encourage folks to kind of spend that money as early as possible because hey, we don't know how long time we have. So having that and front loading that while you got the health and energy and things like that, because as we've talked about in previous podcasts, a lot of times your expenses in retirement go down. They over time, your mid 70s, you start slowing down, and even if you're in great health, maybe the spouse isn't. So, really understanding that. And you don't want to be 85 with this big pile of money and say, oh, I wish I would have spent more earlier. So that's really how I try to couch it with clients is let's make sure we've got stuff earmarked for things that could happen. But after that, hey, this rest of this money, spend it early, make the memories, and then we'll make sure you're okay because you've got that guaranteed income coming in and some other stuff set aside. But you don't want to end up with extra money left over that is life unlived in my opinion. So.
Agree. And, when clients are very concerned about, the idea that even with the pension and Social Security covering most of their needs, even with the set aside for long-term care or other major expenses, some clients just really are worried about how the market could impact their portfolio. And in those cases, I do like to, sort of exercise something like a guardrail approach. not strictly, but for the most part, just kind of demonstrate to the client if your portfolio pulls back by, pick a percent, 10, 20%, what would be the impact to their annual spending or monthly spending? Do you ever kind of run into, have you encountered that with clients? Have you used that approach with clients? And what do you think about it?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think that can definitely be a possibility, or be an option if they are kind of, hey, we think we're going to have kind of steady spending. That can definitely be useful for that. If they're looking more toward, like I was talking about, the, hey, here's a big chunk of money that you can go spend, we'll probably, if it's less than 5 years that they're planning to use that, we'll take it, more out of the market and more into, a fixed, maybe a multi-year guaranteed annuity, which is basically like a CD, type thing, something that you're going to get a guaranteed return on, very little risk, unless the company goes under, type thing. So, options there to just say, okay, yeah, you're planning to spend this because you want to travel and you want to do these things. If it's in that short window of time frame, we won't even subject it to the market, to just make sure that they're covered. So, but yeah, if they've got steady spending and they just want to kind of slowly draw down the portfolio, yeah, guardrails is a great approach for that.
Yeah. Now, it does sometimes happen. Obviously spouses pass away. Sometimes divorce happens. Gray divorce is a real thing these days. So how do you think about a drawdown strategy when there's a change in marital status, whether it be because now you're a widow or because you're newly divorced?
Yeah, that's one of the things you definitely want to plan for, especially with the military retirement and VA pension and stuff. Those things are tied to the military member. So if we assume that it's the military member that may pass away first, um, and that income's no longer there, yes, hopefully they have survivor benefit plan. But if not, that's got to be planned for as part of the buffer piece and the overall plan, to make sure that when the income's reduced, because you're going to lose the lower Social Security payment, as one thing. You'll definitely lose the VA payments, disability payments as another. So it could be a significant drop in guaranteed income that's coming in. And yeah, there probably will be some expenses that are lower, but it's definitely something that's got to be planned for ahead of time. And then, it could require, a faster drawdown of assets to meet, that income that's no longer coming in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I know that, most planners, especially us, we do plan for what happens if a spouse passes away. Um, Clients don't like to plan for what happens if there's a divorce.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to plan for that. Nobody is planning for that, but it does happen. And so it is important, we're not going to dig into the nuances of military divorce and things like that here. But I think probably the key takeaway here is if you do find yourself with a change in marital status for whatever reason, it is time to get an updated plan. Because the drawdown strategy will be different. The income streams are going to be different. You're going to be entitled to some things, not to other things, depending on lots and lots of different variables. So honestly, Mike, I can't think of another way to address this question other than to seek advice if your marital status changes.
And one thing, that's definitely going to change is the tax implications, because you're going from married, you got a much larger, standard deduction. The, income brackets change. So, if we assume it's the other way, where the spouse of the military member passes away first and they've still got all that, income coming in, it could significantly jump, the amounts you're paying in taxes as a single person. So that's definitely, something to think about. And then the other piece is, while you are a couple, it's most often that I see is one spouse is more interested in the financial stuff than the other. And so understanding that and having, stuff spelled out for what this will look like is incredibly important. If you're not working with a planner, but spouse A is the financial person for the couple, having instructions for spouse B, or even, hey, call these people, can be incredibly useful for that spouse.
100%. Um, Now, keeping in line with finding yourself in a different marital status, I'd like to actually move on to the next question, which has to do with estate planning. So, what are the key considerations for folks who are in their 70s? When you're young, estate planning is easy to put off because you always have tomorrow. But obviously, as we get older, we start thinking less about how many days we have left and things like that. So, what are the key considerations for folks in their 70s in terms of financial planning, estate planning, that sort of thing?
Yeah, everybody should have a plan, like you said, but as we're getting later in life, it's more important, and you know, you're getting closer to ultimate death. Death's undefeated, so it's going to happen. So making sure you have the documents in place, and if you've had them in place for 20 years, making sure they're updated. Things change. Families change. Maybe you had kids that got married, then divorced, and there are definitely things to make sure, if you want to control, how your assets get distributed, that you're looking at that. So really, this is something that you're going to want to talk to a professional about, a lawyer that can, work through all the things that you may want to do with your money, and get that documentation in place. The other thing that's kind of highly underrated is for folks to kind of talk to their kids about this, and you don't see that happen as much probably as it should, but just to explain your wishes, especially if there's differences that you're going to create within the family, because we talk about you know possibilities of being equal or being fair. I don't know if you run across that, Amy. If you want to kind of dive into what that kind of discussion revolves around.
Yeah, I mean, so, when you're in your 70s, if you have kids, your kids are probably grown. Their situations have all diverged. You might have one child who, is a Fortune 500 CEO, and another child who is barely making ends meet. And how you think about leaving assets to each child is different. And to Mike's point, do you want it to be fair? You're still going to split it down the middle, and you're going to split everything 50-50? Or do you want it to be equitable? Maybe you are taking into account how your different children's lives have panned out in terms of finances. Or, if nothing else, equitable might mean that instead of splitting the house 50-50, somebody gets the house, somebody gets the IRA that's worth about what the house is worth, somebody else gets the taxable account. So then the numbers might be even, but the tax consequences are different. So it ends up being more equitable, which is, that's a different level of complexity. And I think that level of complexity is definitely going to come along as you reach your 70s, because as Mike said, your kids have maybe gotten married or not. You have probably moved to different states. Maybe your kids have moved to different states. Um, maybe you've accumulated more assets than you thought that you would. So now there's different estate planning considerations that you have. So this part of financial planning is always critical. You always need a plan, but there's a very good chance that if you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, things have changed and you really do need to take a look at your documents, your will, your trust if you have one, or maybe you should have one. An attorney can advise you. Power of attorney, healthcare directives, all of that is critically important. And Mike, I do want to punt it back over to you for a couple more thoughts, but I wanted to foot stomp your point about having a discussion with your family about what your wishes are. Not everything is going to be documented in your will. There's going to be things that you want to pass to your kids, that you probably don't put in a will. So maybe there's a letter of instruction. Maybe you want a certain philosophy for your kids to exhibit as they settle your estate. If you have co-executors, you definitely need to have a conversation between the kids. Or if you have, one child is the executor, but another child is in charge of healthcare decisions. It's really important that you come together as a team, so that one, your family isn't left while grieving you. Your family isn't left in shambles because there was a disagreement. It's a difficult conversation, but I can't think of one that's more important. And if you need help with that, there are definitely experts who can help lead you and your family through those discussions.
And yeah, to piggyback on that about having the discussions, and a lot of times you hear stories where it's the stuff, that kind of people get into fights over monies. There's definitely money issues, but dividing an IRA, whatever the will or document said, that's going to happen. And, that's relatively easy. But it's, oh, well, mom wanted me to have the China set or the painting or things like that. And, heard of a story. I don't know if it was from another planner or something where, the family had everybody, all the kids came in and gave gave out sticky pads, different color post-it notes, to each of the kids, and said, "Go around, whatever in the house that you think you want as the inheritance, go put your color sticky note on that thing, and then." Mom and dad were going to adjudicate, if there were multiple people that wanted, grandma's quilt or something else, they'd have that, but then they'd also know and just keep that as a record of, hey, this is what folks wanted, and, didn't have it in the will, but hey, it was in the letter of instruction of, these things are going to this person, and, getting it worked out ahead of time is much better than, while folks are grieving, you're no longer there to adjudicate, and your kids are now bitter enemies because they somebody got something that somebody else wanted. So yeah, lots of ways to go about doing this, but it is important. And then, Amy, any thoughts again? A couple first spouse dies. You had the paperwork in place. Anything you need to do at that point to, now that the person's single again?
Yeah, I mean, so anytime there's a change in marital status, it's really important to update documents, but it's particularly important to get things updated if a spouse passes away. So in a lot of cases, what will happen is, for an IRA, each spouse will designate the other one as their beneficiary. So if spouse A passes away, all right, that IRA now becomes spouse B's. If spouse B passes away quickly afterwards, there's a good chance that that IRA now goes to an estate, which is a really tax inefficient way to pass assets, and it's very complex. There's a good chance that, where an attorney didn't have to be involved in passing that IRA, now an attorney will have to be involved, which means you're going to have to pay for it. So, it's tough when, I can't imagine losing a spouse. I've helped clients through it. I've never experienced it myself. But, helping if it's your parent who has lost their spouse, so you've lost a parent maybe, helping them through the things that aren't fun but really have to get done. It's really important because it will make things much better. If you end up in a situation where you've divorced, it's equally important to get everything updated because things pass, an IRA, for example, passes by beneficiary. If you don't update the beneficiary and the beneficiary was your ex-spouse, you might be really unhappy to know that that ex-spouse is still going to get your IRA, whereas, maybe you wanted it to go to your children, or a parent or something like that. So staying on top of this, particularly, when you're older and particularly when a marital status changes, is really important.
Yeah, incredibly important. And the one thing just about any of this, they've done studies on this is more in general. Back to the first question and this question about folks as they age and their ability to comprehend and make good money decisions. That after about 55, 60, you start losing that acumen, and it just gets harder. The bad thing is, even though you kind of lose the ability to do that, it's slow over time, but definitely in mid 70s, 80s, it's going down. The bad thing is your confidence in your ability to do these things doesn't go down. So, you have older folks that are still sure they're on top of their game, but probably need some additional help. So just considering that beforehand, and if you need assistance from family, friends, an advisor, that you get that in place, just so there's somebody there providing a backstop, because we hear way too often about seniors losing life savings or a big chunk of it because they fell victim to something, or they were sure this was what they needed to do with their money, and those are just heartbreaking stories. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, when you're in your 70s and 80s, like Mike said, death is undefeated. It's going to happen. You're more likely in your 70s to, not make it to tomorrow than you are when you're in your 20s. That's just the fact of life. So waiting to do these things and waiting to make these updates can be very risky. It's a really difficult thing. I actually just this morning I was reading a story on LinkedIn that an attorney posted about someone who had ended up, they went to the hospital or went to the doctor with a cough. They were diagnosed with cancer and they were not able to execute their documents within 4 days. That's how quickly their situation had devolved. So waiting is never a good idea. It's always a good idea to have these documents in place. But waiting when you're older is even less of a good idea. And have your family members that you trust. So if you're already in your 60s, 70s, be confident in yourself. Nobody here wants you to not feel confident in yourself. But also be clear-eyed about getting help and having trusted advisors at your side, whether it's family members or somebody that you've been working with or you're going to be working with. um Mike, any other thoughts on estate planning, marital status changes around estate planning, things like that?
no, it's just definitely, like you said, get it done as soon as possible, to make sure that there's things that have changed because of that change in status, or in place should something happen to you at that point. So
Yeah.
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 Wow, only
um
got through two questions. So, but in order to not drag this out, we'll have to tackle, I guess, some of these others for in another show. But Amy, any final thoughts?
No, I do really enjoy these sessions. So if folks have additional questions, send them in. We'll gather them up just like we've done here. We don't announce names. Sometimes we make it even more anonymous, like we did today. So send us your questions. We're happy to talk about them.
Yeah, great. So, well, until next time, thanks, Amy.
Take good care, Mike. We'll
All
see you
right.
next time.
Sounds good. Bye.
To get transcripts, show notes, or more information, go to operationretirementreadiness.com. Have a question or topic for the podcast? Send it to info@operationretirementreadiness.com. Find out more about Amy and Mike at their websites. Mike is the founder of Next Mission Financial Planning, LLC. He retired from the U.S. Air Force and has worked in the financial services sector since 2021. He is a certified financial planner, chartered financial consultant, and a certified college financial consultant. You can find out more about Mike at nextmissionfinancialplanning.com. Amy is the founder of Instar Financial Planning, LLC. She is retired from the U.S. Army and has worked in the financial services sector since 2019. She's a certified financial planner, a chartered federal employee benefits counselor, and a chartered retirement planning counselor. You can find out more about Amy at instarfp.com.